Right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a while, and welcome to another episode of the Engineering Leaders podcast series. Where we actually bring together top engineering leaders, tech professionals, to share their journeys, insights, and lessons with everyone. Today we are honored to have Gustavo. He's a seasoned technology leader with over 25 years of experience in engineering, cloud computing, and AI. If you don't know who is he, he has led major initiatives at Google, Microsoft, Nokia, and really shaped the future of how cloud and AI solutions look like, worldwide. So currently, Gustavo actually serves as the global practice director for AI infrastructure and runtimes at Google, okay, where he actually drives innovation and on the AI and cloud computing side. And with a career, okay, I believe located in multiple continents, taking on high impact roles. He has a lot to share with this community. Without further ado, let's welcome Gustavo, on the show. Welcome, Gustavo. Really excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Kenny. Really a pleasure to spend time with you and share some of the perspectives on this long journey. As you mentioned, Singapore is my country number seven, and is the country I have choose, hopefully for life. So really, really excited to be part of your show.
Oh, I mean, that's great. So actually, I'm just curious, right? Because you mentioned Singapore as the choice of country. Uh, why so?
It's a actually very interesting story. I left back my home country, which is Brazil, back in 2005. And since then, I have been in Turkey, Dubai, Angola, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and then later in Singapore. And the first time I came to Singapore, actually, one of my ex-bosses back in Brazil, uh, he became the Microsoft president for Asia Pacific. And I was in an Asia tour actually on vacation and decided to see him here. And I really fell in love with the place. I think not only the infrastructure, the the safety, and it's almost like an environment of I probably must say it's like very similar, even weather-wise, to my original city of Rio, but it's like, oh, they got it right, right? And I always had as an objective to eventually move to Singapore. I spent 8 years in Dubai, and then when the opportunity came while I was at Microsoft to replicate the work I was doing for the Middle East, but for Asia Pacific, I definitely took it. Of course, a lot of things I had to adapt in terms of lifestyle, being able to commute much quicker and be much more integrated to the community, and be a little bit more far away from my home country, but definitely a place that has grew so much and so much establishment. Really, really a country that has been built in the last 60 years, which is really an amazing place to be, to raise a family, and to hopefully give back to the community as well.
And for yourself, right? Because you have traveled so many different continents, I believe relocated multiple times. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, having to adapt to new cultures, new countries, and what are some of the yeah, what are some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I did my first international move. One, I was quite young. I was, I think, 24 when I first moved internationally, and it was not really a unusual move. People usually from Brazil, they move between cities, going from smaller cities to the business capital, and eventually they go to the U.S. Usually that's the most common route, and I choose to move directly from a smaller city to Turkey, to Istanbul, which I could have never planned that. But the opportunity came in an area I was a subject matter expert, and I had experience to actually start that business, which at the time was called the hosting business. So if you think about the cloud computing today, 20 years ago, that was called hosting business, and it was done by smaller companies called hosters. So a lot of challenges in terms of adapt culturally, understanding, um, cultural nuances, um, including, even on the fun side, I'm left-handed, and in many countries the left-handed is not used. So you can imagine how some potentially awkward situations I have been through. But I think the biggest takeaway I have from all those interactions is that finding your own space, finding what can be in the beginning a potentially liability, but turning that into a superpower is the key when you actually go into a new place. And in my case, I stayed in the same company for many, many years, but the parameter for me of change was countries, regions, continents, languages. But for many people can be different jobs, different industries, even within their own environment. And being open-minded and also trying to over time nurture that angle that you bring of uniqueness, which again, it can be a shortfall in the beginning, turning that into a superpower is sort of I would say, a very, very good avenue uh, to pursue those challenges and turn into something positive.
Could you, I mean, if you don't mind sharing, like, one specific example that you actually did that, for your career?
Yes, I would say even back when I was based out of Bahrain, for example, I was running that hosting business for a while, and I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do something that was different. And one of the countries I was responsible for on that specific line of business was, of course, sub-Saharan Africa, right? Not countries, but set of countries in the continent. And a Brazilian that speaks Portuguese in the context of Africa as a continent, or even sub-Saharan Africa, you could say that there is a series of limitations. I don't speak Swahili as the Kenyan language. I don't speak French. I'm not a, let's say, native speaker for South Africa. But one of the desires I really had at the time was to open an operation for Microsoft from scratch. And one of the things I found out was that Angola, which is a country in West Africa, Southwest Africa, was getting out of civil war, and a lot of colleagues from Portugal and from Brazil at the time, they were providing consultancy to the country because there was so much backlog, there was so much growth that was there. Until it came a time where I pitched to the president of Microsoft in Africa at the time to open the operation in Angola. So you can imagine I took something that I wasn't from the region, I didn't have the culture component, but I found a sweet spot where I could contribute, and I had a network because of all those consultants coming from either my country or from Portugal, until we got to a point where we justified to open that operation. And I started that operation from scratch, being the country manager for Microsoft in Angola. So sort of looking beyond that initial limitation and finding something that you can uniquely contribute can go a long way. And not taking a no for an answer at first. As you can imagine, landing in a new region, not having any cultural similarities can be downing and overwhelming at times. But looking beyond this and trying to find out how can you uniquely contribute. I think the Angola example is definitely one that comes to my mind because at first it would be very hard to identify that.
I see. Well, sounds like you have been through a lot of like exciting projects here and there. It must be really exciting to work on like different continents, really live in different cultures and solve unique problems. I'm pretty sure not many engineering leaders had that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think
Mm,
what I sort of observed after those many years is that wherever you're coming from, wherever your customers, your employees, your colleagues are coming from, there is always a way to build a connection uh, and help each other. right? So one of the things I definitely use um, as an entry point for me is to understand where people are coming from, understand their motivations, and see how I can help. That
Mm,
is sort of always the first step. And sometimes you do this in your own country, in your own language, but I think it becomes even more important when you're in a new and foreign environment, because that will show to people the willingness, the true willingness that you have to get their perspective. And in my experience, at least, only good things can come out of that. So before asking for something for you, asking how you can be helpful can go a long way, especially if you're new to an environment.
mm. So, Gustavo, I believe you had a very long and illustrious career at Microsoft, with over 20 years of experience. And even, I believe, in one of your reflections, you mentioned that you were one of the youngest employee to be employed by Microsoft back in the 1990s. Um, you know, and I'm sure that you have been through a lot of highs and lows in your career as well. So, could you share some of the biggest lessons you have learned through that journey and maybe certain specific examples with that?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I think my experience or my journey joining Microsoft was definitely an interesting one. Um, I joined Microsoft 2 months. My start date was 2 months after turning 18, which, in some countries can be, very limiting in terms of, NS or other obligations that people need to go through. And I must tell you that I wasn't hired at first, right? One of the things I don't know if I ever written anywhere is that I actually applied for the job or for a series of jobs way before that, probably even before turning 18. And I never got an answer, right? Those were the early days of commercial internet, but I never got an answer. And I always say that I actually interviewed my boss before he interviewed me. And the scenario was very interesting because I used to write for newspapers and physical magazines. That was a thing back in 1998. And there was some early indication of Microsoft launching Windows 2000.
Mm,
And I wanted to get a quote and some level of interviewing of the regional manager of Microsoft back in my city. And that was actually the I would say the main purpose, or probably later on the excuse I had of going to the Microsoft office, sitting down with the regional manager, interviewing him for the newspaper, and at the end of the day actually handing over my resume to him, a resume that I actually had way before in their hands, but for some reason they never looked at. And I did that, I think was 1st of November. And then in a very, very process, 18th of November, actually, I was starting in the company.
I see.
So very unusual, but again, it goes back to the point of, being curious, trying to find alternatives on how can you do that. These days, maybe that's not easy to do, but I think there is always a first, and that's actually how I started my career, let's say in
Mm,
MNCs, Microsoft and Nokia, now for the last 4 years plus at Google. Um, it's always trying to find an angle. So that is, I think, one of the aspects that is super important. Following the traditional channels is important, but trying to find unique ways to get your message across and to make sure that people understand that you care and you're passionate is super, super important.
mm, I see. And I believe that there were certain defining moments, right, of your career that taught you, important lessons. So could you share like some of these important lessons that you would tell yourself, you will give your younger self if you could turn back the clock?
I think, I would say I was raised in a very, very structured environment, working very early in the career in a MNC. puts a lot of structure, potentially boundaries on how you work. One of those boundaries is that there is always a certain speed that the organizations um, want you to operate.
Mm.
Many people choose to work for big companies because they don't necessarily want to be entrepreneurs. But I do think, and this is a particular area of passion I have, is that you can work for a big company and be an intrapreneur, right? You actually leveraging all the skills, the passion, the desire of an entrepreneur and doing this inside of a company. At times, those people can be called troublemakers, right? Because they are trying to challenge the system. They're trying to do things that are not in the official way of operating. But I think there is a sweet spot of what I call being a good troublemaker, or better say, an entrepreneur, where you are pushing the boundaries, you want to make things happen, you are operating within the right limits of the company, but you want to innovate. You're showing your curiosity. And I would say that that is something that for me at first was very, it was part of my instinct. And but the environment doesn't necessarily help you on that. So if I had to say something back to my, 24 years old, 20 years back, I would say that do not give up on being stubborn in that way of pushing the boundaries, trying to be curious, trying to run faster than the organization that you're operating. That's where I think it made a difference for me to take this very unusual path of growth, going from country to
Mm.
country, growing, in terms of seniority, scope of work, and being able to actually operate across the board. Many people, they are very successful in a company if they only work in one country, or if they work with one type of boss, or sometimes even the same, leader for a long time. And I think by pushing the boundaries, by showing that you truly care, you're able to transcend that. And yes, sometimes you're going to work for great leaders, and maybe you're going to have an easier time and you're going to learn different things, but you're also able to thrive if you're working with leaders that you don't have necessarily, the best level of synergies, or sometimes that they wouldn't hire you in the first place. I
Mm.
think that Uber energy, that sort of self generation of energy, is for me the point I would advocate the most. Not only looking back for me, but also for anybody that wants to, enter, um, thrive, and continue to grow within a big MNC environment, or corporate environment for that matter.
I see. Actually, I have been hearing a lot about the term intrapreneur. So, for the viewers that don't know what entrepreneurship is, right? Basically, is being an entrepreneur in the confines of a corporate structure. So, it's mostly I think it was kind of popularized in Google and I believe in 3M as well. What they usually do is that they will give some level of autonomy to the employees to innovate and come up with new campaigns, ideas to improve certain systems. And I believe, in certain organizations, while being very rigid, I mean, some organizations usually having their own structures, allows for some opportunities to actually present certain ideas to improve certain systems and become an innovator within the company. So I believe, I have described it correctly, right?
You did. And I think to put an example, Google has a very well documented system of 20%, which are jobs and roles that people can do on top of their main accountabilities, and many successful products came out of that. So it's something that the organization encourages, that for
Mm.
people to experiment and do work that they are truly passionate about. What I would say is that beyond Google and in corporate world, is that a lot of people sometimes feel that they are limited to what they are being asked to do. especially if they are at uh, more entry level or junior in their journey. And I think that is, you know, depending on where you are in your career, there's always going to be a percentage of your role, of your job, of your work that you're being asked to do from upper management, right? But I think the secret is that independently of where you are in your career, there should be always a percentage of the work that you are proactive. People haven't thought of that yet. And because you are much deeper than leaders or managers in that particular piece of work, you have a unique insight to be proactive and to bring that proposition. Maybe at first, without worrying too much if people will like, if they will approve, if they will take it forward. But think of more of an uber responsibility to say, I understand this problem better than anybody else because of the circumstances of my job, because of my level of expertise. And therefore, I need to be the one that takes the first step, raises the hand, and puts together. Sometimes it's a one pager describing the problem. Sometimes, companies have a very structured way of raising those ideas. Sometimes it's going beyond and connecting with an executive that is not even within your management chain and sharing an idea. I think that first step is something that everybody needs to consider independently of where they are in their career journey.
Okay. And actually, because for some companies, right, usually let's say for the junior engineers, they are tasked to do certain task, their day to day. So, are there any ways that they can innovate outside of the work that they're doing? Because usually, they're already quite tied up with certain deliverables they need to deliver. So it's more of like, oh, I'm just doing the work that I'm tasked to do. However, I noticed that for you, you have the spirit of like going above and beyond, and actually, taking some time off to actually innovate certain ideas. So, could you give an example of how you actually did it in any organization, under those constraints I've mentioned?
Yeah, yeah, and maybe to pick a sort of a formula, and then I can mention an example, Kenny. I think a formula, it can always be tied to where you are in that company, and particularly the position, the role that you are, right? Um, I use a framework of, let's say, on average, you are in role for 3 years, right? You can be in on average for 3 years. The first year you learn, the second year you execute, the third year you prove that it wasn't luck, and you actually have a very consistent performance. So you will have uh, less ability to do that level of innovation and proactiveness when you're learning the job. And I would say that in many cases, you're learning the job in your first year.
Right.
Depending on the complexity, you can learn in 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months. But I would say that percentage can be very low. You can still, within your first year, be very proactive, share your perspectives in addition to the job you're doing. But of course, it will be less. In the second year, you can increase that. You actually can do that level of execution. And then, of course, in the third year, you actually have the platform to try more. One of the examples that comes to my mind is um, if I think about one of the roles I did in my career, I started in, it goes back to my first, let's say, management experience as a people manager experience, is that it was a role I started as an individual. I was a subject matter expert in that area, but I was in a new country. I was in a new segment and I was in a new industry, but I had a deep understanding of the product. So my first year was pretty much concentrated on learning and delivering success. So in the case was signing the right level of partnerships, working with the telecom operators that were my customers and partners at that time. Now, the position I was hired for was to be an individual contributor, but I felt that after doing this for 12 months, that there was a demand, there was opportunity for me to do this in other countries, and I couldn't be in multiple places at the same time. Uh, so I said, hey, why don't we hire contract people um, to actually do this on a part-time basis or even on a full-time basis, but before becoming employees. Now, if you are in a big company, you would understand that when you're hired to do a job as an individual contributor, in many cases, you need to be hired or interview again to become a manager. And that was the opportunity I found to actually become a manager of someone who was in a contract at first, but without going through this process. I was successful in the role myself. I wanted to expand the impact, and I put a case together and convinced my upper management to actually hire that contractor to do this in another country. And then at the end of the second year, we had, if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 contractors, and then my job got officially translated into a people manager. This is a while back, but it gives you a sense of if you have to follow the standard path all the time, you may be at a disadvantage, right? Because either you don't have the people management experience in this case, or you don't have all the credentials. But when you start doing a job before you ask to do the job, you actually get some unique perspectives that even the most experienced people manager in this case wouldn't have the same level of insights because either that person is coming from a different division of the company or sometimes even externally. So getting those and doing something. If you say, I want to do this next job, when people come to me and ask for advice or mentorship on that, I, in many times my question is, okay, if you want to do this, what's prohibiting you from doing this job today from your current position? And that by itself can initiate a very powerful dialogue because at times there are opportunities for people to start doing that without even changing the position, which hopefully in many ways will help them get that position further down the line because they already have the experience and the sympathy of the people they are impacting.
Oh, I mean that's really a lot to digest, and if I were to summarize, probably it's at the end of the day being a bit, I mean, a lot more proactive in a lot of the initiatives that we are doing, and sometimes it's always when you're an innovator and you're an entrepreneur, you have to take that leap of faith, anyways, to really experiment out and find out and figure out things, and through that process it's things that people don't do outside the job scope, so that's why you have that advantage. Yeah, if I hear.
Yeah,
Mm.
and that is, I think, one point, especially if you think about your audience of engineers and technologists, Kenny. It's what I call the 99% and the 1%. Because many of us technologists are perfectionists by profile, we tend to dedicate a vast majority of our time to getting things at a level of perfection that is probably the minimum for us as individuals, but potentially way above average if you think about our stakeholders. And because of that, we miss what I call the 1%, meaning if you do the job, which is usually 99% of the time, you gotta invest your 1%, which is to monetize that. Make sure people are aware of what you have done. Think of ways that that piece of work will help others rather than just focusing on doing the work. Sometimes it can be coding a new product, sometimes it can be creating some technical documentation. Again, it applies to every single piece of work across industry that technologists will do. If you do the job, which is the vast majority, make sure that people are aware of what you're doing and use that not only as a mechanism to promote, which, for some people might not be a natural muscle at the times, but to get feedback. right? If anybody who is listening feels uncomfortable sharing what they're doing because they don't want to promote, they don't feel comfortable, think of this as a mechanism to receive feedback, to actually improve the product or the capability that you created in the first place. I think that is super important because I have seen with my teams, with people that come to me asking for advice, that in the vast majority of cases, they do the work, but they miss that last mile, which will make a whole difference on getting people to understand how significant, how meaningful, how relevant, and the purpose of what they have spent their time on.
Hmm, I see. So it's really down to the level of details and the extra mile that really makes you stand out. So competitive, in the industry, and really the last mile is the one that separates the 1% from the 99%.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think people need to be true to their values, right? And they shouldn't do things that they don't believe. But I still believe there is an opportunity for them to experiment with some of those concepts, put their toe in the water, and see how they feel by doing this. So the example I mentioned on getting feedback is just one. There are many others where you could take an idea that you could be resistant at first, but make yourself comfortable and see how that evolves over time.
Hmm.
My vast experience on this is that people do get more comfortable over time, especially as they see the results, as which comes sometimes in terms of appreciation, more exposure, recognition from very different angles.
Hmm. Got it. Right. So, Gustavo, as a director over at Google and, presently holding multiple top level positions, previously at Microsoft, I believe you are someone who is a huge advocate for, high performance, team culture and leadership. So just curious, what do you feel were the best traits, personal beliefs, factors that allowed you to rise up that leadership ladder, within Microsoft and now Google?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to look back and see everything connected. Things, I would say, probably worked out over time. If I have to sort of document this and share, I would say probably number one is the sense of curiosity, the sense of wanting to understand how the whole system works, that relentless sense of acquiring knowledge and trying to make sense of how I can be impactful is something that helped me a lot along the way. And I can also observe similar successful people that have demonstrated that level of desire to understand what are the problems that are being solved. So curiosity tied with proactiveness is super important. It can be at times even have an overweight versus initial experience or even capabilities that an individual has, right? You see it this, I think, throughout corporate world and public life. Some people you don't sometimes even understand when someone is in such position. And if you sort of study and read, there's always a component of having that sense of proactiveness and ability. Another angle which is super important for me as well, and I use this with my teams, is the sense of commitment, right? I think, especially in tech jobs, there is a lot of opportunity, right? Of course, people want to work for the best companies and the best positions, but the sense of joining an organization, being committed to that organization, it comes very, very clearly towards management and towards colleagues, right? So people that demonstrate that level of commitment is they can clearly come across as people that have the ability to raise the whole organization. And that's what leaders are looking for, right? You're not only looking for someone who can do their job. That's usually, table stakes is sort of what you need basic to perform. That's what people are hired for. But the differentiation that comes on top is, can this person operate and raise the bar for everybody in the team, right? In the same way, you don't want to have someone in your organization that pushes people down. You actually want to have your top talent not as individuals, or sometimes what is called the lone wolf. You want people to actually raise the bar for the team, and that, I think, comes across. Probably the commitment is the the easiest way to transcribe that. And I think the last one, which is super important as well, is always think, and this is something that has helped me a lot, but always think of how is the work that you're doing being able to help the organization.
Mm.
We can be asked to do something, we can do with quality, but if we are not truly developing an understanding on how this is important, on how this can be important for the leader or the manager we work for,
Mhm.
there is a very big possibility to miss the point of why you're doing that in the first place.
Right.
And it's not necessarily to question and say, why am I doing this work? We shouldn't do this work,
Mm.
because that probably crosses the boundary of being a productive discussion, but it's more develop this understanding actually to solve it, right? Um, some people have the ability to identify problems in amazing ways, but they are not necessarily the best to suggest solutions for those problems. And I think if you're able to provide both, you're in a unique situation, because not only you're able to identify them, but actually to propose potential new avenues that the group you're working for, the leaders, the company, they haven't identified yet. So I think that balance of identifying a challenge but proposing a solution is super important, uh, because again, you know, there's a lot of talk about companies, businesses, hiding practices, um, burnout, and all those things. And this is super important because you want to have the right working environment. But at the end of the day, those are businesses, right? And having that level of understanding on how this contributes to the business makes a huge, huge difference, independently of where you are in your career. Uh, when you reach certain levels, that becomes a basic requirement, but there are many advantages of doing this at all career levels, because that's what demonstrates to the company that you're thinking broadly. It's what many people can say is like, "Oh, are you a leader?" Right? So there's those statements come from all the time, and I think it comes down of, it doesn't matter if you have direct reports, if you're senior, if you're junior, if you just joined the company, but are you thinking with the lenses of, if this business was mine, what would I do? Even if I don't have the answers,
Mm.
right? I think that sort of mindset is what will probably has served me well personally, but actually is one of the best indicators for people to grow and to even make their job more enjoyable, right?
Mm.
Because uh, if you're able to connect yourself, I mean, we talk a lot about, do you have fun at work? And I think a big part of fun, it means that, am I emotionally connected to what I'm doing? And having that understand, I think, is key for you to have that emotional connection.
Mm. Got it. Right. So, Gustavo, right, since you're working in AI, okay, and tech. I believe it has transformed the whole industry landscape, and in a way, not only does it impact our daily lives, however, some engineer they are actually worried about their job security because of these developments. So Gustavo, based on your experience, what are some of the important maybe trends that present certain threats and opportunities in the current decade? And that engineers should be paying close attention to.
Yeah, I think by the way, I think we are doing very well. We only said AI in this show very few times. A lot of the shows I listen to AI is throughout, but you're absolutely right. AI is a super important trend, and I do think there will be a lot of sometimes roles, sometimes types of work each one of us do that will get eventually simplified, potentially automated, or even the value chain of the work to be something that uh, artificial intelligence can be done. The formula I use for myself and the formula I recommend to all to think about, specialist technologists, which is super important, is that when we are doing a technical job, be it engineering in a more um, original way or in technology, be it if you're a developer, system administrator, DevOps, any one of those careers, we have a natural preference to do work where there is always a right or wrong answer. That just comes with a profile, that comes how we are trained. And I think for most of the things that have a right or answer response, we are on track for AI to eventually automate this to a point where it will be very, very light touch for people. On the other hand, on business, sometimes even on technology, there are a lot of problems that there is no right or wrong. There's no black and white. There are choices that people can make. And I think those are the problems or the areas of specialization that people should focus on. When you are, for example, defining an architecture for a customer, there might be multiple architectures that are right and wrong, depending on scenarios that, at least in the foreseeable future, cannot be automated. When you are set up in a team, there might be different scenarios where you can set up this team and be very, very productive. So there are many scenarios where right and wrong is not a binary answer. And I think those areas will continue to exist. Um, for that, soft skills is very, very important. So I think a multitude, even the top engineers, I think the very holistic engineers that are successful, there's always an opportunity to improve in terms of soft skills. And I think one of the things that is very helpful for people is to um, think beyond the problem that they are presented. Ask more questions of why that problem statement is coming across. If I was to give you an example, sometimes we get requirements saying our customer needs this. And if you take the approach of a yes or no or a black and white, we can say we have such functionality or we don't have such functionality, right? But I think there is a lot of value understanding why does the customer wants this in the first place?
Mm.
Do they want this because another company told them that they need? Do they want this because a peer in their industry told them this is good? But what is the original motivation? So that's just one of the scenarios of developing that understand behind the scenes,
Mm.
which again opens a completely opportunity that yes, maybe you won't have such functionality, but by developing the understanding, you can serve that with different techniques, different products, different perspectives.
I see. Awesome. Actually, Gustavo, linking back to elaborating a little bit more about what you mentioned. So, of course, it's about how to not get AI to replace is really, uh, understanding the nuances of certain things that because AI is a little bit more black and white. However, understanding the connections, how it links back to the company, how it links back to the purpose that we are doing is always something that only humans can at the current moment comprehend and gel it together, and that's what leadership and not just within the small teams but in a bigger context actually really looks like, and that's something that AI can't really replace. I think that's just the sensing that I'm getting
Yeah,
from
and
what
then
you said.
use, I think, the opportunity. This is not a transition that we'll do from one day to another. The opportunity is to use the AI capabilities that exist and will continue to grow to help us automate and increase our own productivity on doing the tasks we are being asked to do today in lesser time with a high level of precision and free up our time to actually think more holistically, right? So if you think of this of saying, there is a particular technologist who is in their job today is to code, right? Or to run infrastructure operations. Before AI, everything needs to be manually or through scripts. After AI, or by leveraging some AI technologies, they can definitely increase their level of productivity. They
Mm,
can automate, they can do things with a less human error, and leveraging the time. I think the key aspect is leveraging the time, the resulting time of such proactiveness automation to think more broadly about the problems. And again, going back to be proactive and see the opportunities where AI doesn't have a role to play, let's say, at least as far as we know,
mm,
in the foreseeable future.
I see. Right. And Gustavo, right? I believe, many young engineers dream of working at top tech firms like, Microsoft, Google, and because of like promising career prospects. I believe that's the dream to work at the FANG companies. However, of course, I'm sure it's not easiest thing to land a role there just one day, So, from your experience hiring many talents, what are some of the important qualities, top tech companies are actually looking at when hiring new talents, that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I think many of the global multinationals, especially the platform companies, have a very big ecosystem where individuals, community members, enthusiasts, partners of the many different types can play a role. So yes, I do understand, and as I look back, that was one of my original motivations of joining a big company, is to reach that level of working for a multinational and working for the original company that created that set of products. But I would say the opportunities exist in many levels. So you can imagine of through training, through certification, through community building, through working with partners of service partners, technology partners. Those are many can be used as many entry points to be part of that ecosystem. That at times can lead for a job in one of those big vendors, but sometimes it doesn't lead to, and but you're still part of the ecosystem. So imagine that there are many steps that can be taken by people to say, hey, if I want to work for company X, let me look at the ecosystem of company X and let me see how I can be part of that ecosystem. Joining that ecosystem is much easier than joining the company without any credentials, without any presence in that ecosystem. So I would definitely recommend any individuals who are looking to join a particular company to look for that related ecosystem and see how they can participate. Some companies, they have this concept of MVPs, which is the most valuable
Great.
professional, and then I think they can, play a key role in the community. Open source technologies also allow you to be part of that ecosystem with unique contributions. Some companies have rewards, recognition for that. And I think that is a sort of a staggered way for you to take that. Um, there are other ways to join, right? I mean, this is one of the, if you think of this as of a problem or a problem statement, is joining a big tech company. There is not only one way to get there. Some people, they go to top universities, they have great GPAs, and they are hired from universities. That's definitely one way, uh, which, a certain percentage of people will go through that, and it requires a lot of dedication. But there are also alternative ways. And personally, I love to learn by doing it. And if I look back at my career, I was a Microsoft certified professional way back before I joined Microsoft. And I
Mm,
think that's what gave me the the subject matter expertise and the energy and the knowledge of the environment that led me to have a successful role there, similar to Google, similar to Nokia, kind of transitioning within
mm,
the industry. So definitely recommend people to think about the ecosystem they want to be part of, and
mm,
then make sure that they are investing and they are proactive and they are passionate about what they're doing. Every day, every next day will be better after they dedicate themselves to that.
mm. Got it. Gustavo, I'm just also curious, right? Because I believe you have seen and worked with many top level engineers. So what would you say are maybe some of the differentiating factors, okay, of high performance compared to the rest? Um, you know, are there any like mistakes that, common mistakes maybe the majority makes that, the top level performers don't? Or like certain factors that separates them.
I think it comes down, Kenny, to the level of expectation, right?
Mm.
That people have. One of the things I had the pleasure of working with many amazing leaders in my life, and I'm very, very thankful to the amazing leaders that helped me, grown me, mentored me, promoted me, and gave me opportunities. Uh, but as you go through your career, uh, it will not be always that you have a great manager, right? That's just the reality
Yeah.
of the world. There will be managers that sometimes at that particular moment you don't feel they are great or they're even good managers. There is this very, I think, common phrase that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. Uh,
Mm.
and there will be times where it's not only at that point in time, but even over time when you look back and say, wow, it wasn't a mistake to sort of work for that person. I think learning how to work for a good manager and a bad manager is a very, very important skill. Because if you learn to work for a bad manager, when you have a good one, you can use this as an accelerator. But you're
Mm.
not really on a survival mode if you're not working for a leader that you can connect to, that you respect, that you have the right level of alignment to. So figuring out how to generate your own energy and working with different profiles of leaders is definitely one thing that can be a super important skill throughout your career. I would actually, and this can be controversial, I would actually refrain from advising people that they should only work for the people they connect with, because that might be, it's like going to the gym, right? The first day you go to, it creates a lot of pain the next day, right? And you say, and your immediate reaction say, I'm not going the next day because it created me pain. But if you go the second day, the third day, the fourth day, it gets to a point where it just becomes muscle memory, and you act it very naturally. So it, it's not only working for a leader that has a different perspective, but seeking feedback from leaders or stakeholders that you don't naturally align to. I think it's a very, very important point to build a solid base for your career, right? Because you want to be, I mean, if you think about a span of, each one of us works, 25, 35 years, right? Uh, you will be in tough spots from time to time, right? Either because the company is not doing well or because the market's not performing well. There will always be a variable that's not in your favor. And being prepared for that is super important, right? That's what makes the difference. Of course, there's always a component of being in the right place at the right time or in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think what you want to do is to concentrate on what's in your control and making those conscious choices to always think of your career as a series of building blocks. If you think about your next position and all the things that you're going to do in the next position are the same that you already have in your building blocks, maybe you're missing an opportunity to learn something new. Yeah, maybe, compensation pays off and you get more. That's okay. But never miss an opportunity to learn something new. Even if that learning you anticipate, that can be a little bit painful, because that is what will make the difference when you are um, riding against the wave, or when there is some specific, turmoil, be it in the market or in the company you work on.
Actually, I've through these conversations, I think one thing that really stood out to me about you is how you always turn crisis and even the most negative experience into something positive. I feel that that is very consistent amongst top leaders. It's never a bed of roses. Progress is not linear. However, you always turn it to something that can be a progress and a learning pointers, which I believe actually that's something that's really remarkable about you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I think there is a very well documented thought process of there are things that are our areas of concern, and I'm concerned about many things, but then there are areas I can influence. And those are usually very, very small. I can be concerned of many more things versus the ones I can truly influence. And putting the majority of your focus on the areas you can influence, I feel it's a much better usage of your energy, because you don't want to be in a position in career, but probably in life as well. But let's focus on career. You don't want to spend the majority of your time on something you're concerned, but you can't do anything about it, right? That will be completely draining and potentially not productive. So I think that's maybe one of the potential mechanisms that people can use to take that aspect you just mentioned of being positive, is actually concentrating on things you can do something about it, and then be very intentional of the actions you're taking.
Hmm, I see. So, Gustavo, as we wrap up the podcast, I just have a few closing questions, some burning questions from the audience that they have. So, engineers being very task-oriented and, sometimes, they take pride in their work. Okay, what they really struggle with, right, is that, they always tell me, hey, Kenny, I work really, really hard in my work. However, I just don't get the recognition that I'm looking at. My boss doesn't recognize me. Other people are promoted ahead of me, and a lot of them attribute this because some people, they can talk their way to promotion, where some of them, they believe in honors and let the work do the talking. to promote. So I'm just curious. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this and how they can potentially navigate out of this really tricky situation.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is very interesting, and I definitely have seen this with, teams and people part of broad organizations I work for. The aspect of let the work do the talking, I think is very fair, right?
Mm,
But it assumes two things, and I think uh, we shouldn't assume. It assumes that one, that is discoverable, meaning is that work that you have done, is it accessible to people, or is it the best kept secret that you have done and you actually assuming or you were expecting people to find out, right? So I have seen situations where people do an amazing work, but even if I wanted to find out that they have done that work, it would be a lot of work. And you always need to think of that person, that stakeholder may not wake up thinking about the work that you're doing, right? So um, I think there is an opportunity for people to look at any piece of work they produce and do a fair evaluation of, if I had the most amazing manager, if I had the most amazing stakeholder, would that person be able to find that? Or would that person be able to naturally recognize this? And if they have any doubts, I think there is a little bit of things, again, going back to the area of influence, that they can do about it, right? So that's number one. Make sure that yes, you may not be comfortable to start of promoting your work or talking you out of promotion, because again, that's not the comfort zone for many people. But make sure that your work is not secret, right? Make sure that if people are interested, they can find out. That's, I would say, step number one, right?
mhm.
For people to get comfortable. Step number two is it goes back to that point we discussed earlier, which is the 99% versus the 1%.
Right.
You spend, so think of, a capability that someone has built for a quarter, right? 3 months of intense work. Why you wouldn't focus if you spend, let's say, 3 months, 90 days doing something? Why you wouldn't spend one day making sure that people know about it,
Mm,
right? It's a completely unbalanced equation, but even with that, many people are reluctant to make sure that people are aware. And the awareness is the first step, but also is how is that relevant for that person you're communicating to? Because again, I may do a crazy capable functionality for you, but if I'm communicating to you in a way that's important for me, but I'm not thinking with your lenses, you may still not get the recognition. Okay. Nevertheless, there will always be situations where there are constraints, companies go through different phases, but I do think that using this dual stage process of one, making sure your work is not secret, and second is dedicating 1% of your time to make sure that your work is actually visible, can go a long way and will definitely help you better understand the motivations um, and the rationale of the people you actually asked you for that work in the first place.
mm. I think those are really, really good points. It's all about it's like when you have a really great product, but no one knows about it, then it still stays hidden in the shelf. No, no, it's pointless as well. Actually, I think one of my mentors told me before, right? So, he was saying that, what is the most popular burger in the world? and naturally people think about McDonald's, Burger King, and he asked a very good question. He said that, do you think McDonald's is the best burger that you have eaten in your life? I'm sure it wasn't for you, right, Gustavo? I mean, I'm sure that you had better gourmet burgers. However, why is it the case? Then it all really comes down to visibility and, marketing or whatever you call it. So I think that lesson really taught me the importance of just being more visible, more present. It doesn't mean that we have to sell ourselves, you know, and what Singaporeans call as wayang, suck up to the boss. It doesn't have to be that way. However, some level of confidence and visibility is important for the work. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Maintaining the beliefs is very important, right? Everybody will have their own level of comfort in terms of being uh, all over the boss or the organization, some more on a reactive basis. So finding that right spot, I think, is super important. And I'll tell you one thing: the people who are naturally good at their work and are more, at times introverts and are more less, you could say, show off, when they master how to communicate and get that message across, they come with an incredible level of they come across very confident, and the authority they bring goes way above the people that are maybe selling too much.
Mm.
Because we know that when that person's communicating, we know there is some good quality work behind that. And it's
Mm.
just not talking for the sake of talking. So I think that's imagine this is a sort of a superpower that can be harnessed by the people that produce high quality work, because the quality work is there. They just need to figure out that last bit of communicating. But when they do that, there is an amazing output, high level of confidence, trust from leadership shows up very, very evidently, because people know that when that person is communicating, when that person is sharing, there is good quality, consistent work behind that.
Mm. Yeah, those are very good points. Gustavo, just to wrap up the session that we have today, for young professionals in tech looking to build a fulfilling and meaningful career, what's the one advice that you would give them?
I think it's very common to say, do what you love. Um, but I would say that has been my case. Uh, so I wouldn't give up on that. And if you don't find the environment that can harness your energy, that you can thrive, um, feel free to change. But at the same time, always look from the perspective of, would I find that problem again? And if the answer is yes, is, hey, maybe you can try in the place you are today, right? A lot of people talk about changing companies. I think during COVID, we saw a huge change of people from one company to another. I don't have some statistical data, but pure perception, people every 2 to 3 years, they change jobs. Being someone that spent 21 in one company and now more than four in another, I would say I think there is value of understanding problems and trying to nurture that in the position you are, in the organization you are, because those are very important muscles, not only for your current job, but for any other job that you would have in the same or the next company.
Mm. Got it. So, Gustavo, where can the audience actually connect with you and, to follow your work and insights?
Absolutely. Well, people occasionally can find me in Changi Airport because I do travel quite a lot.
All
But
right.
digitally, they can find me on LinkedIn, Gustavo Fuchs. I'll be happy to connect. And from time to time, I share some perspectives and hopefully some pieces of wisdom along the way.
Awesome. So, thanks, Gustavo. Really, really appreciate you being here. And I hope whatever he has shared actually inspired all of you to, build meaningful careers and really to connect with him to learn and, to find out more also.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Kenny, for inviting, and good luck. Great, great, great show, and great spending time with you.
Awesome.